We're given an opportunity in the Senate to witness many things that have an impact on our values and on our votes. I have found that, of course, representing my own state and knowing the challenges that families face from one end to the other has really driven me in terms of my legislative agenda, things that are important to me. That's my first priority. I found as I've traveled across the United States other issues that are of great magnitude and have a real import when it comes to the lives of people across this nation. But I've also taken some time to visit countries overseas, knowing that the United States is part of a world community and that even though the amount of money we may invest may be small, it can have a profound impact on some of the poorest places on earth. It was about 6 years ago that I made my first visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo. This was a part of Africa that I had never seen before, and I went to the city of Goma. Goma in the eastern reaches of the Democratic Republic of Congo is remote from the capital of that country and has become, unfortunately, a site where thousands of innocent people have been killed. When I visited Goma, it was clear that it suffered from some of the worst problems of the region: poverty, obviously, disease, war. Troops that left Rwanda after the genocide were living in the jungles of Goma. People were being preyed upon and killed, raped, mutilated. And then on top of all that, in Goma sits a volcano, which erupts with some frequency. So as you walk through the streets and into the refugee camps, you find this dried, crystalline lava that is almost like broken glass. People walking on it, living on it, trying to make a life in little holes dug out in the lava. It's something you'll never forget, and I have never forgotten. I went there, of course, taking a look at some of our important programs that we deal with. The most important, of course, trying to bring peace to the region. One of the most serious issues in the Democratic Republic of Congo is the fact that in these eastern reaches, there are precious minerals which are critical for the development of new technology. We carry in our cell phones minerals which are found more frequently in that part of Africa than in most places in the world. And because there's little or no government reach in these areas, there are people who have taken over the mining of these minerals and make millions of dollars off of them using slave labor and terrorizing the local people, pushing them into refugee camps. I'm working with Congressman Jim McDermott of the state of Washington to try to establish some standards. Former Senator Sam Brownback of Kansas was with us. And the object behind that, of course, is to trace the minerals so that those respectable, law-abiding companies in the West will not be buying these conflict minerals. We're working on it. It's hard. The Securities and Exchange Commission is trying to promulgate a rule to implement something that we passed in Dodd-Frank with Senator Brownback's leadership on a bipartisan basis. But my memory of Goma goes back to a specific scene and a specific visit. It was more than 6 years ago, and we were invited to tour a hospital. And we went to this hospital, and to say it was a hospital by American standards, no American would agree. Searching inside the hospital, we found one modern surgical suite. And it was paid for by the United Nations. And then we went to the wards with the patients, virtually all women, and found them two to a bed recovering from surgeries. Outside the hospital, sitting on this lava bed that really covers the city, were along the road dozens of women waiting for their turn. They are the victims of something known as obstetric fistula, which means that they have either been brutally attacked, sexually attacked, or were bearing children at such an early age that it caused damage to them, which has left them incontinent. And because of their incontinence, they were rejected by their family and neighbors and forced to walk hundreds of miles to sit in the roadway and pray that they could get inside that hospital for a surgery to repair this obstetric fistula. Many of them, because of the severity of their injuries, went through multiple surgeries. So they would sit on the road and wait for weeks, go in for a surgery, recover, and then go to the back of the line and start over for the next surgery. That was the reality of the hospital we visited. The scene was grim, even horrific. I still remember it well. The reason I come to the floor today is that I made a return trip 2 years ago with Senator Sherrod Brown to Goma and to look up this hospital, this small little oasis of hope, to try to find the handful of doctors who had been there when I visited just a few years before and to see what had happened. I knew that the hospital continued to treat desperately poor and brutalized women of the region who'd suffered because of brutal rape and horrific violence. For 2 decades now, this war has gone on, which has led to these victims. Regional militias have been fighting over these minerals that I mentioned earlier, too often using rape as a weapon of war. According to the United Nations, the Democratic Republic of Congo is the worst place on earth to be a woman. Regional war and rape leave an estimated 1,000 or more women assaulted every single day. 1,000 or more rapes and sexual assaults every day. 12% of Congolese women, 1 out of 8, have been victims. Yet, there is hope. That small hospital that I saw years ago gave me hope. The 2 people who started that hospital were Lyn Lusi and her Congolese husband, Dr. Joe Lusi. They founded this hospital and called it Heal Africa. It's in one of the most forgotten and dangerous places on the earth, Goma in eastern Congo. Lyn and her husband, Joe, provided a place of love, hope, rebirth, and healing. There was a special on PBS NewsHour recently that talked about Heal Africa, the hospital, and Lyn and Joe Lusi. They survive on $13 million a year, a huge sum in that part of the world, but by global standards or American standards, hardly overwhelming. They get private grants from overseas. They provide antiretroviral drugs to those suffering from HIV, and they try to repair the bodies of these traumatized women. The PBS NewsHour special on Heal Africa showed how the hospital worked with the American Bar Association, and I want to give a shout out to them for the work they're doing in Goma to help rape victims pursue justice against their attackers. The country virtually has no judicial system. It's the only facility offering services to an area population of 8 million people. 8 million people. I try to imagine one hospital in metropolitan Chicago, and that is what Heal Africa is in Goma. In the moving NewsHour interview, Lyn Lusi said, "I have no illusions that we're dealing with major issues that are pulling the Congo apart. There's so much evil and so much cruelty, so much selfishness, and it's like darkness. But if we can bring in some light, the darkness will not overcome the light. And that's where faith is, if you believe that. I don't think Heal Africa is going to empty the ocean, but we can take out a bucket full here and a bucket full there." That sentiment and that hope, amid such cruelty and devastation, summed up Lyn Lusi's heroic work and the work of her husband. As I reflect on what I saw on my first trip to Goma and what I saw when I returned, there was a dramatic change in just a few short years. This Heal Africa, which was barely existing with a handful of surgeons, now was becoming a training hospital with American universities taking part. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited Goma and Heal Africa, this very hospital, to focus the world's attention on the region. The violence in eastern Congo is part of an ongoing conflict, and about 3 to 5 million people have died there so far, and it continues. As I said, the roots of the conflict go back to the Rwandan genocide, the fight over minerals, elements of the Ugandan Lord's Resistance Army, this Coney fella who now people are starting to take notice of, a butcher in his own right, and elements of the Congolese army that have been involved in human rights abuses. There's a 20,000-member United Nations peacekeeping force in the region, been there for more than 10 years. I don't know how they could maintain any semblance of order without them. I salute the United Nations and those who are on the ground trying to keep a peaceful situation. We saw sprawling refugee camps on broken lava, human rights workers who bravely documented horrific sexual violence, dire poverty and warlords amid any semblance of a functional national or local government. And stopping at Lyn and Joe Lusi's hospital was the highlight of the trip. When I was at Heal Africa on this second visit, I looked and saw a classroom filled with doctors. In fact, standing in front of them was a doctor from the University of Wisconsin. He was wearing a t-shirt which had the Wisconsin Badger on it. That's how I noticed it right off the bat. That's where my daughter went to college. And he said, yes, these are all students from medical schools around the United States coming here to learn and to help. Today, the hospital has trained 30 young Congolese doctors and many other health workers. They'll have an important job for many years to come. Madam President, the reason I come to the floor today is we received sad news. Lyn Lusi, whose picture I'll show you here, with her husband, Joe, was really the heart and soul of Heal Africa in Goma. The two of them gave their lives for the poorest people on earth. They struggled and persevered and conquered so many obstacles that many of us never, ever see in life. Well, we just got word this morning that Lyn passed away from cancer. And I wanted to come to the floor and remember her and the great work that she has done, which I'm sure will be carried on by Joe, her husband, and all of those who've been inspired by our visit. To think that this woman would go to one of the poorest places on earth and dedicate her life to help others should inspire every single one of us. Mr. President, Madam President, Lyn Lusi was like a mother to 400 employees of Heal Africa and to thousands and thousands of women, children, and even men for whom Heal Africa was their only source of quality professional medical care. Her death this weekend due to cancer is a terrible loss for Goma. It's a terrible loss for the Democratic Republic of Congo and for Africa. It's a terrible loss for every single one of us. We need to make certain that what she gave her life to does not end, but continues. We have to make certain that her heroic efforts continue through her husband, Joe, and through all who have participated in making sure that this lonely, tragic corner of the world is never forgotten. I come to the floor to salute Lyn Lusi, her memory, her legacy, and her inspiration.